China is planning to build a nuclear power plant on the edge of the Gobi Desert that would be the first in the world to use molten salt as the fuel carrier and coolant.
China just announced plans to build something that shouldn't be possible. A massive cargo ship that could run non-stop for 30 years without refueling. A vessel that never shuts down its reactor. And the craziest part? It will be powered by thorium, a metal long talked about, but never fully tamed. And if they pull it off, they'll have solved a puzzle that nuclear engineers have been chasing for 70 years. But that's just the one side of the story. What this really means is China could use this breakthrough to dominate global shipping, secure unmatched energy independence, and position itself as the ultimate power on the world stage. Now, to understand why this matters, we need to go back to the beginning, to why thorium was abandoned in the first place, and why China is now betting billions on reviving it. The thorium advantage. Thorium is element 90 on the periodic table. It has existed in plain sight since the dawn of nuclear science, and yet it was almost completely ignored. The reason wasn't technical, it was political. When nuclear technology emerged in the 1940s, energy was only part of the equation. The real priority was weapons. Uranium could make bombs, plutonium could make bombs, but thorium couldn't. So governments poured money into uranium-based reactors. Entire industries formed around it. Thorium was left behind. But thorium has advantages uranium never had. It's 3 to 4 times more abundant. It can be found in beach sand and common rock formations. In terms of availability, uranium looks scarce by comparison. It's safer. Thorium reactors operate at atmospheric pressure. There's no risk of explosive steam buildup like at Chernobyl or Fukushima. And for ships, the most important factor is energy density. 1 ton of thorium can produce as much energy as 3 million tons of coal. That means a single fueling could power a ship for decades. No refueling stops, no fuel supply chains, no exposure to oil price shocks. So why, with all these advantages, wasn't thorium adopted from the start? Because thorium was never a plug-and-play solution. Unlike uranium, thorium is not itself fissile. It cannot sustain a nuclear chain reaction on its own. To work, it must first be converted inside a reactor into uranium-233, a process that required decades of research that governments were unwilling to fund. By the time scientists understood thorium's potential, the world had already committed to uranium. Billions had been spent. Thorium wasn't rejected because it failed. It was ignored because it didn't fit the priorities of a world racing toward weapons, not efficiency. So, while everyone else doubled down on uranium, China looked again at what had been left behind. China's strategic move. China is the world's largest trading nation. Its economy depends on moving enormous volumes of goods across oceans. That shipping runs on fossil fuels. Massive container ships burn thousands of tons of fuel per voyage, producing pollution on the scale of millions of cars. But the bigger issue is vulnerability. Over 80% of China's oil imports pass through the Strait of Malacca, a narrow choke point that could be blocked in a major conflict. Cut that artery, and China's merchant fleet grinds to a halt. Thorium changes that equation entirely. A thorium-powered ship doesn't need oil. It doesn't rely on foreign fuel ports. It doesn't depend on vulnerable supply routes. It just runs for decades. China has been quietly developing thorium technology for more than 10 years. They've built experimental reactors, tested molten salt designs, and invested billions into research that Western nations largely abandoned. Now they're moving toward deployment. The announced megaship is only the first step. If it works, China plans to scale the technology across its merchant fleet, cargo ships, tankers, and potentially naval vessels. But there is an issue with thorium, which is why it has not been widely adopted by many nations. The engineering challenge. Building a thorium reactor on land is difficult. Building one that works at sea is far harder. Ships pitch and roll. They vibrate constantly. They face temperature extremes, corrosion, and mechanical stress. all while operating continuously for decades. China's solution is a molten salt reactor, a design proven viable in the 1960s but never commercialized. Instead of solid fuel rods, thorium is dissolved in molten fluoride salt. The salt serves as both fuel and coolant, circulating through the reactor core and reaching temperatures above 600 degrees Celsius. That heat generates electricity, which powers the ship's propulsion. The safety mechanism is simple and elegant. If temperatures rise too high, a freeze plug melts, and the molten salt drains into passively cooled tanks. The reaction stops instantly, no human intervention required. A meltdown is physically impossible. But there are challenges. Molten salt is corrosive. Materials must survive extreme heat for decades. The reactor must be compact, lightweight, and heavily shielded to protect the crew. China claims these problems are solved. Their prototypes have operated successfully. If that's true, the first ship could launch within 5 years. But why is this a game changer? See, fuel is one of the highest costs in maritime trade. A large container ship can burn 200 tons of fuel per day, often costing over $100,000 daily. Over a ship's lifetime, fuel costs can exceed the vessel's purchase price. Thorium removes that expense almost entirely. Yes, construction costs are higher. Nuclear reactors aren't cheap, but their operational costs are low. Today, ships slow down to conserve fuel. A thorium-powered ship can operate at maximum speed continuously, cutting transit times significantly. For China, this creates a massive competitive advantage: faster delivery, lower costs, greater independence. But money isn't the full story. There's another benefit, and it's far more strategic. The military dimension. China isn't just building a cargo ship. They're developing a technology with obvious military applications. Nuclear-powered warships have existed since the 1950s. Aircraft carriers, submarines, but they use highly enriched uranium, weapons-grade material that's expensive, heavily regulated, and difficult to obtain. Thorium reactors don't require weapons-grade fuel. They can't be weaponized easily. That makes them politically safer to deploy widely. But they offer the same military advantages: unlimited range, sustained high speed, and no refueling vulnerabilities. A thorium-powered naval fleet could operate indefinitely, far from home ports. No fuel tankers needed, no supply chain to protect, no logistical constraints on deployment duration. For China's Navy, currently the largest in the world by ship count, this technology could enable sustained operations anywhere on the globe. The United States has relied on nuclear-powered carriers and submarines for decades to project power. But nuclear vessel construction is expensive and slow. The U.S. fleet is aging, and replacement rates are barely keeping pace with retirements. If China can mass-produce thorium-powered vessels cheaply, it gains a massive strategic advantage. Some analysts believe that's the real goal. The cargo ship is just a proof of concept. The real prize is a new generation of naval vessels that can dominate the Pacific and Indian Oceans without the limitations of conventional fuel. Environmental impact. Global shipping produces about 3% of worldwide carbon emissions. That's more than Germany's entire economy. And it's growing as trade volumes increase. Decarbonizing shipping is one of the hardest challenges in climate policy. Ships are massive. They need enormous amounts of energy. Batteries aren't viable for long-distance ocean crossings. Hydrogen and ammonia fuels are still experimental and expensive. Nuclear power is the only proven technology that can deliver the required energy density with zero emissions. Thorium makes nuclear power safer and more practical than uranium-based systems. If China proves the concept works, other nations will follow. Within decades, the world's merchant fleet could transition from fossil fuels to nuclear power. Shipping emissions could drop to nearly zero. That's a climate victory of enormous scale, but it also raises questions. Who controls the technology? Who sets the safety standards? These aren't simple problems. They require international cooperation. And that's why China's announcement didn't happen in a vacuum. Other nations are watching closely. Global response. Russia has been developing floating nuclear power plants for years. They already operate several in Arctic waters, providing power to remote coastal communities. South Korea has announced its own molten salt reactor research program. However, the United States has been slower to respond. American nuclear policy is cautious, shaped by decades of accidents, regulations, and public skepticism. But military strategists are paying attention. If China's Thorium ships become operational, the U.S. Navy will face a competitor with potentially superior endurance and lower operational costs. That's unacceptable from a strategic perspective. Expect American investment in thorium research to accelerate rapidly, not just for civilian shipping, but for military applications. Europe is divided. Some nations see thorium as a climate solution worth pursuing. Others remain opposed to nuclear technology in any form, preferring wind and hydrogen alternatives for shipping. The International Maritime Organization will need to develop new regulations, safety standards for nuclear-powered commercial vessels, protocols for port access, liability frameworks for accidents. This is uncharted territory. The rules don't exist yet. China is moving fast, hoping to set the standards through first-mover advantage. If their ships work, their designs become the template others follow. That's technological leadership with geopolitical consequences. China's thorium-powered megaship isn't just an engineering experiment. It's a potential turning point in global trade, energy independence, and naval power. If it works, we enter a future where ships run for decades without refueling. And that future may be nearer than it seems. Within 5 years, the first thorium megaship could be operational. Within 20 years, hundreds could be crossing the world's oceans. So what do you think? Is thorium-powered shipping the future we need, or a strategic advantage that reshapes global power for generations? Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. If you liked this video, ensure you give it a thumbs up. Also, consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, because we will be uploading more crazy stories like this one in the coming weeks. Until then, see ya.